Welcome and thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. If this is your first time participating in a Cancer Support Community Atlanta program, we invite you to visit our website, cscatlanta.org, and complete a new attendee form to stay connected to all future programs.
Good morning, everyone. This is Emily Brown, the Program Director at Cancer Support Community. Thank you for joining us this morning for this cooking demo on fall soups. We are about to get started. I just have a few more people to admit to the meeting.
Hey guys, how's it going? We're starting to get a little bit of cooler weather, so this is good timing, I think, for fall soups. And I've started making soups at home, and so I'll share some more ideas with you towards the end if you guys want to share some ideas for soups that you're loving. I'm going to do 2 recipes today. I've got a chipotle black bean tortilla soup, and then I've also got a vegetable minestrone soup. And both of these are vegetarian, and I'm going to talk about how they provide protein, because that's something that, since we're not using any meat in these, but awesome sources of cancer-fighting foods. And I'm going to start with the chipotle black bean tortilla soup. So can they get the recipes yet? If you guys want to follow along, you're more than welcome to. And I actually, I'll let you know if we make any changes with what's written here. And that brings me to my first ingredient. The first ingredient listed on the chipotle black bean tortilla soup recipe is the type of oil, and it gives you lots of choices: avocado, grapeseed oil, coconut oil. I think the main gist here is just use an oil that has healthy fats and use one that you have on hand. You don't feel like you have to buy a special oil for this recipe. I'm actually going to use olive oil just because I wanted to keep the oils in both of these soups the same. So I'm going to use a extra virgin olive oil for this. All right, so first I'm going to get my pot warmed up at about a medium heat. Got my oil, just drizzle some of that in the bottom. You want to warm up your oil before putting anything in. And I've got our onion here. Don't try to mess with the skin and remove it while it's whole. One tip here is to remove the root end while the skin is still on. Remove the stem end while the skin is still on, and then cut right through the middle. It's so much easier to get rid of the skin that way, or the peel, whatever you want to call it. And it usually will come off in one whole piece. So I'm using a half of an onion for this recipe, and I'm going to use the other half with the other soup recipe. So I'm going to put that over here. I also have, to make things easier, a garbage bowl. I use this at home too, not just for a cooking class. It helps it helps things go faster, because then you don't have to run back and forth to the trash can, and it helps keep things a little bit more tidy. So in cutting the onion, make sure that your cutting board is not sliding around the table. One way to help with that, if you have a slippery cutting board, is to put some damp paper towels underneath. That kind of acts like the yoga mat for the board. All right, so then we've got our onion. You want to move it towards the edge of your mat, your cutting board, stand in the middle, hand on top, and then you're going to make some horizontal cuts. And it always helps to have a very sharp knife. And notice I'm not cutting all the way through. That kind of helps hold everything together. And then you're going to go vertical, one direction, and then vertical the other direction, to get some nice even cuts on your onion. That will help it cook evenly in the pan. You won't have like a huge chunk that gets underdone or a small chunk that gets burned. All right, so I'm just moving the oil around. It's nice and warm now. And you want to, hopefully you can hear, the sizzle of the onion. That means your oil is nice and warm. That's a good thing. Okay. Next, I'm going to cut up the pepper. So I've got an orange bell pepper. You can use any color you have, any color you like. We're just going to go with half of the pepper. Remove the seeds. And then we're going to just dice this up. So I do long strips first, and then I'll cut it into cubes next. So kind of turn it. You can line it all up. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just make it go faster. All right, that can go in the pan. It's already smelling good. Okay, we're gonna do garlic next. Your recipe calls for 3 cloves of garlic. I have 2 because they're rather large. So take that into consideration when you're deciding. If your garlic is huge, you probably don't need 3. 3 is kind of a lot. So I just gave it a smash just to kind of help the skin come off easier. Let's move this around the pan here. The onion and the pepper take a little longer to cook than the garlic. You have to be careful with garlic because it can burn and then it gets kind of a bitter taste. So we'll let these cook a little longer before we put the garlic in. So I'm just going to trim off that little stem end. And then we'll mince it up. It's always easier to cut more than 1 clove of garlic at once. I find cutting 1 clove of garlic is kind of challenging. It kind of gets lost on the cutting board. So run your knife over top. Now is a good time to sharpen your knives. It makes such a difference to have a sharp knife. And sharpening knives is not necessarily an easy thing to do at home. I always just take my knives out to, there's several stores that do knife sharpening. You'll drop off your knives on like one day of the week and then you'll get them back another day. Usually takes about a week. But Cook's Warehouse does it. They charge you per knife. And then some of the other cooking stores may also do it, like what's that store called? Sur La Table is the store that does it. But gosh, it makes such a difference to have a sharp knife. I'm gonna wait a few minutes to let these cook down before adding the garlic. So you might want to edit that on your recipe. I'm also gonna add a pinch of salt to bring out the flavor. Sorry guys, I'm right here. Lost you for a second. I'm just gonna put some salt in this jar. Kind of season as we go. Okay. That's kind of it. Well, there's a little bit more chopping if you want to do the optional garnishes, which I'll show you towards the end. But that's kind of it for the chopping on this recipe, which is kind of nice. The other things that I prepped ahead of time was I just opened 2 cans of black beans and rinsed those in water to rinse away the can juice part of the bean. So we'll put those in a second. And then we have frozen corn, so I'm kind of letting that thaw a little bit on the countertop, but very easy there. One of the interesting ingredients here in this recipe, which adds a lot of flavor, is a fresh salsa. So on your recipe, it mentions a Chipotle style salsa. And I shopped at the Fresh Market for this class. And so I was kind of limited to what they had there. They do have several fresh salsas. So when you're looking for fresh salsa, you'll find those in the produce section of the grocery store. And it's always in the refrigerated area. Those have such a good flavor. They are just a lot fresher than like the jarred salsa. So anyways, I got a fresh salsa for us today. It is not chipotle flavored. Chipotle is a type of pepper, and they've smoked it, and it just has a very intense, hot, smoked flavor. So some people really, really love that flavor, and you can buy just simply canned chipotle peppers in the aisle where you would find like canned beans. But anyways, if you're not into the chipotle flavor, or if they don't have it available, you can use any favorite fresh chunky salsa. And so that's what I have here today. This is just a medium heat salsa. You can use mild though if you want. And that's where we're going to get like the heat for this soup. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add the garlic. And then I'm going to add our spices. So I have cumin, about 1.5 teaspoons. Make sure your spices are fresh. They have a good smell. They're not expired. That's where we're getting a ton of flavor from these spices. And then we have chili powder, about 1 teaspoon of that. Chili powder is a mix of a bunch of different spices. This has chili powder, paprika, cumin, oregano, black pepper, garlic, and onion powder. So about 1 teaspoon of that. And then we're going to mix it all in. The flavor of the spices is going to come out in the oil here. So make sure you let them warm and sort of, I don't know, brighten their flavor in the oil first before adding any liquid.
Ashley, we have a question. What is your favorite way to cook up dried beans?
Dried beans, ooh. So I like to use a pressure cooker for dried beans. They cook so fast, or like the equivalent would be an Instant Pot. And then using my favorite bean is black beans, actually, surprisingly. And I love Cuban black bean soup. So I would do like a Cuban style black bean soup. I also really like, now these aren't dried, but I really like frozen, buying frozen like butter beans or lima beans or field peas and cooking I basically just like cook them in some boiling water. And then at the end, don't add any salt, but then at the end, kind of keep a little bit of the liquid, add a little bit of salt and some butter. And that's like an easy bean dish that my daughter will actually eat. She doesn't like black beans, but she does like lima beans. And they take like 20 to 30 minutes to cook. So not too long. Okay, I'm really smelling this now. I want to be careful because those dried spices are in there. Now I need to add some liquid so that all that stuff in there doesn't burn up. So I have some stock. You could use homemade vegetable stock. You can use like, I have to use chicken stock today because they didn't have the right kind of vegetable stock that I like. But always when you're picking, if you're buying a boxed stock, make sure it's low sodium because they add so much sodium to these. And not that not that the soup needs to be low in salt. You might want it to be if you're watching your salt intake, but you might not be watching your salt intake. I just like the low sodium ones because then you can add your own salt and like season as you go. If you look at some of those that are not low sodium, like I looked at one in the store that had like 600 milligrams of sodium in one serving, like in 1 cup. So think about it. You're adding 4 cups. By the way, this whole container is 4 cups. So that's a lot of salt, especially if you're seasoning too with your own salt. So anyways, technically our soup is not vegetarian today because we are using a low sodium chicken broth, but use vegetable stock if you want to keep it vegetarian, and add the words low sodium there to your recipe to make sure that you can control the amount of salt. I love this brand, by the way. If you can find this brand, all of their stocks and soups have a really good flavor. Sometimes the flavor of the stock can, if it's not a very good one, it will kind of mess up the flavor of your soup. So be careful. I wouldn't go with something just because it's on sale or necessarily, because you want to make sure it has a good flavor. I've had pretty good luck with this brand. It's called Imagine. Their vegetable stock is excellent. So now I'm adding some of the other ingredients. We have the salsa. So we're doing about, and this can vary. The amounts for this is very flexible. If your salsa is like ridiculously spicy, you may not want to add 1.5 cups. So I'm going to start out with 1 cup and add from there. And adding the liquid is totally fine because we're doing a soup. But this particular one has like big chunks of bell peppers, onions, jalapeno, and tomatoes. So it looks really good. So we're going to start with a cup, maybe add a little bit more depending upon the taste. We've got our 2 cans of black beans. And then we've got some corn. I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit so we can get it up to a simmer. So we have about 1.5 cups of corn. Let's see.
Make this one too spicy.
Any leftover corn, I'm going to consider adding to the other soup that we're making today, the vegetable soup. Just to show you that it's super flexible recipe. So you can add what you like. And if you like corn, I know that if I can add corn to a soup, my kids might eat it. So anyways, we're going to check and decide if we want to add corn to that one. But you may not like corn, so. Okay, that's pretty much it for this part of the soup. I'm going to add a touch, let's taste it, and I might add a little bit more salt. You want to bring it up to a simmer and kind of let it develop its flavors for about 20 minutes or so. That's, all soups are the same. They all develop their flavor over time, and they all taste better the next day after they've sat in the refrigerator. So let's see. I'm checking for the salt, but I'm also checking to decide whether or not we want to add a little bit more tomato, and I think we can. It's not too spicy. I think this will be really nice to add the full 1.5 cups of the salsa. So go ahead and do that. And we'll just let it, I'm not going to add any more salt. I think it's fine. So we're going to let it simmer and do its thing. And then at the end, I'll show you some of the garnishes. So you'll see on the recipe, it says optional for serving. We've got some fresh lime juice, cilantro. You can add some red onion, tortilla chips, avocado, cheddar cheese. So I'll get that ready towards the end of class. I want to go ahead and start the other recipe to give it some time to cook before we end. Okay, so what I'm going to do, what we can do now is anyone could ask me questions about this recipe while I kind of gather these things up, move them to the side, and get the next recipe set up. So does anyone have questions about this recipe or comments so far?
One question, did you add coconut sugar?
Coconut sugar. Oh, that's in the instructions, isn't it? Let me see. Was it in the instructions? I did not add any sugar to this recipe. I deleted it out of the ingredient list, but I may have forgotten to add it, delete it from, yeah, I see it in the instructions. Don't worry about coconut sugar. You don't need any of it. I'd never use added sugars unless it's like a dessert recipe. So yeah, don't worry about the sugar. You don't need that. Good catch. right.
They said good because they don't have any.
Nice. Yeah, that is kind of a obscure
If
trigger.
you're not,
Sorry, this was from the Minimalist Baker, which, by the way, if you've not gone to the Minimalist Baker's website, there's some awesome recipe ideas on there. This original recipe came from her website, and if you're looking for some inspiration, that is an awesome. It's listed underneath the title, Minimalist Baker. I've been going to that website for years, and there's some really good ideas on there. I think our other recipe came from there too. Yeah, the other recipe that I'm about to start also came from that website.
we have
Okay.
another question. If you're
Yeah.
not using cheddar as a topping, what else? If you don't want to use cheddar, what else could you use? I guess what other type of cheese?
So if you want to leave out cheese altogether, no problem. Just leave out cheese. Another option, if you want to kind of go with a dairy option, would be sour cream. I've also been able to substitute, if you aren't a fan of sour cream or you want something that's like higher in protein, lower in fat, you could do just plain yogurt as a topping. That's also really good. If you don't want to use red onion, you could try green onions, like the scallions. Those seem to be milder in onion flavor. There's lots of different ideas. I love this reminds me of a chili in a way. It's a little bit different, but it's similar to a chili. And whenever I make chili, it's all about the toppings. Or, like eating it with tortilla chips. I just think that makes
How do you
it
feel about the
so good.
value of?
So I'm going to switch out.
Hold on
soups.
just a moment. We did
Oh,
have
yeah.
a question. What was that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I wanted to know what you think about the nutritional value of canned beans versus dried beans or frozen beans, or is there a hierarchy of which bean to use? It's better to go for one of the beans other than the canned beans.
Ashley, she wanted to know what you think about the nutritional value of canned beans versus dry beans, and if there's a hierarchy that you go by for that.
In terms of nutritional content, they have the exact same amount of fiber, and fiber is one of the awesome things about beans, and protein, same that you're getting from canned versus dried. The only difference really is the amount of sodium. So with canned beans, rinsing them will reduce and take away some of that sodium. So rinsing them with water will get rid of most of that juice and liquid. You can find beans that have no salt added or that are low sodium. So those would be an option if you're looking to lower the amount of sodium. But otherwise, nutritionally, like vitamins, minerals, fiber, protein, all of that is the same in dried versus canned. And actually, I think I've read a few articles where people have they've done like a blind taste test, and they've tasted the difference between dried and canned, and most of the time they cannot distinguish the taste difference. Canned are way more convenient. But if you're in the habit of already cooking dried beans, like on a regular basis, and freezing them, because you can cook them and freeze them cooked, and then they're easy. You can just take them out of the freezer when you're ready to use them. Otherwise, I think canned beans are a good,
Great. Thank
healthy
you.
substitution, and they're much easier and convenient.
Good to know.
Okay.
For anybody who's asking for the recipe, I have uploaded that a couple times to the chat box. I know it gets erased if you came in later. So if you can't see that on chat box, just private message me and I'll try to get that to you via email.
Okay, so I'm setting up for our next recipe, which is a vegetable minestrone soup. It happens to be gluten-free, if that's something you're trying to incorporate, because I've selected a brown rice pasta, a gluten-free brown rice pasta, as an option. So, okay, I'm going to switch out pots. So we'll continue to let our black bean soup simmer over here on the other side. Let's Okay, so this recipe is good for using vegetables that you already have on hand, or vegetables that are in season. So there are some vegetables listed here. We've got carrots, green beans, zucchini, but you can be flexible with this. So if you have like I said, like the frozen lima beans, those are a good thing to add. Corn, frozen peas. I don't know why frozen vegetables come to mind, but you can be flexible with this recipe. I have the half of the onion left over from the other recipe that I'm going to go ahead and mince. So I'm going to cut it the exact same way I did before. This technique for cutting onions is something I had to practice. I really did not. I was not good at this at first, but once you learn how to do this, it just makes cutting an onion so much faster and more precise, which is helpful because if you're making soups, you're probably going to use an onion.
Ashley, we have a question. Do you need to cover the black beans when you let them simmer, or is it okay just to leave them uncovered?
It's okay to leave them uncovered. There's plenty of liquid in there. What you would want to be worried about, if you were worried about the amount of liquid evaporating, you could cover it, but it's at a very low simmer right now. I'm not concerned about there's plenty of liquid there. But if it makes you feel better to cover it, you can. It's not going to make much of a difference at all. Okay, so oil into the pot. We've got extra virgin olive oil again. It's warming up already. So it's not going to take long for that oil to heat up. Move it around the pot. It's already warm. So I'm going to go ahead and add the onions. And the onion is flexible. You could use yellow onion, white onion, sweet onion. All right, and then I'm going to work on the garlic again, if I can figure out where I put it. Where did I put the garlic? Here it is, hiding over there.
So do you have a favorite brand of cookware?
Brand of cookware, nice. This particular stovetop is induction. I don't know what kind of stovetop you have, but you have to consider that first when you're buying cookware. If you have just a gas range like I do at home, then my go-to is, what is it called? You guys are testing my brain here. Well, let me tell you this. This is not what I was going to say, but something that just popped into my head. When I make soups, I like to use enameled cast iron. There's a bunch of different brands for that. You don't have to be so concerned about the brand of enameled cast iron, but it's kind of like cast iron, except for it has an enameled seal on it. It makes it easier to wash and take care of. I like that because it holds the heat of the ingredients in the pot. They're super heavy, but they're really nice for cooking soups. The brand that I have of that at home is called Staub, S-T-A-U-B. But Lodge makes them, and a couple of other companies make those, Le Creuset. Those are really nice for soups in particular. So let me think of the other. I'll think of it. Just give me a second. If I don't think of it by the end of class, then I'll. But it's stainless steel, and it's not like coated with a nonstick coating or anything like that. The only time I ever use a nonstick coating is when I cook like eggs. I think that's nice to have. But other than that, I just use this regular stainless steel pan. And I will think of it shortly. Just give me a minute. It'll pop into my head. Okay, so that's our garlic. I'm going to set that off to the side and not add that yet. I'm going to work on some of the other veggies here. So these are the carrots that I have. I like to buy the carrots with the tops attached. That tells me that they're nice and fresh. The carrots in the bag are fine. They're totally fine, but they may be just not as fresh, not as sweet and juicy carrot-wise.
Tracy, okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Also, buying carrots in the bag, like the baby carrots in the bag, I find that those might be fine for snacking, but if you taste test them next to carrot like this that has the top on it, there's no comparison. These have so much better flavor. They're juicier, sweeter. The baby carrots tend to be just sort of tasteless, in my opinion. So
Another question, can you use a garlic mincer versus chopping?
oh yeah, so that's a good question. I use, well, it depends upon what kind of mincer you're talking about, but yes, you can, as long as it doesn't totally pulverize it and make it into a paste. So that is challenging if you're cooking garlic in a pan. If it turns into a paste, like if it's like a garlic press, the garlic tends to burn by the time it's cooked. So if it's just like a hand pump mincer thing, that should be totally fine. My only thing with that though is that if you can learn to cut the garlic by hand, if you have a sharp knife, you practice, you learn to cut the garlic by hand, it's so much easier because then you don't have to wash and clean a separate item that's just made for cutting garlic. I'm all about like simplicity and using minimal tools because I don't have to wash dishes. If it's something you can pop in the dishwasher, maybe yes, that would be fine. But
Do you think you need to always peel the carrots, or can you just wash them if you don't want to?
Yes, but I don't know if you guys could see. The reason why I peeled these was because they were extra kind of dirty looking, brown, like, you know, they just didn't have. So by peeling them, yes, you're losing some of the vitamins and minerals, but most of them are still here. And they have such a brighter, nicer flavor when you can get rid of that thin layer that was like underground. Kind of tastes a little dirty sometimes, even if you scrub them. I don't know. Also, the texture of that didn't look great because it had some little roots attached. I like to peel them. It's so funny. Like my mom, when I was growing up, my mom never peeled the carrots, and they always like I could never. I don't know. They just always had this distinct like earthy taste. And then when I started cooking for myself, I learned to peel the carrots, and they just have such a brighter, better flavor. To me, it's personal. No harm done though if you don't peel them. It's no big deal. They will still be delicious. So, okay, the carrots go in. We've got some green beans. These are fresh green beans. If you have frozen, you can certainly use frozen for that if you want to. Those are fresh. I'm going to give everything a stir. We're trying to get these soft. And I'm going to add a pinch of salt. Just to kind of bring out the flavors of everything. I made a version of the soup at my daughter's preschool with the kids. And so if the preschoolers can make this, it's not, you know, it is more chopping, but the soup went over great. And I'm going to show you a trick if you are serving little ones who might be skeptical of like a mixed vegetable dish. I'm going to show you a trick here at the end. So this is our zucchini. I trimmed the bottom and the top. I'm going to cut it lengthwise, and then I'm going to cut it again. I'm going for like more of a bite-sized piece. So cut it sort of into these long pieces first, so quarters. And then from there, I'm just going to chop it all together. That's much faster than cutting each side individually. Zucchini is totally optional. If zucchini is out of season, let's say it's the middle of winter, zucchini is more of a summertime, early fall vegetable. If it's out of season, no problem. You can substitute or just leave it out. All right, so that's all of our veggies minus the garlic. I haven't added that yet. I'm gonna turn up the heat a little bit here. I'm at like a medium heat. And then, let's see. As soon as these get a little softer, we'll add some of the liquid and the spices. So let me talk about the pasta here real quick while that cooks. So this is a gluten-free brown rice pasta that I have never tried before. I've not tried this brand before. But what I did, you can use any pasta that you like. It does not have to be gluten-free. It does not have to be the shape. You can use shells. You can use big, wide, like big noodles. It totally depends upon what you like. And there's tons of different gluten-free pastas out there right now. This one's made from brown rice. So the only ingredients in this is brown rice flour and water, which is kind of nice if you're looking at the ingredients. It's a very clean product. And so it also is pretty high in fiber because they have that brown rice flour in there. And it's also a really good source of protein. But you'll get, even if you aren't eating gluten-free, if you choose a whole wheat pasta, you'll still get a ton of fiber and protein in that as well. So gluten-free is just an option if you want to go that route, but it's not good or bad if you choose a whole wheat pasta or a regular pasta. Also, I want to throw out there, you don't have to use whole wheat pasta. You can use white pasta. You're still getting a ton of fiber from these beans as well as all the vegetables. So if you're just not a fan of whole wheat pasta, like if I was cooking this at my house, I would just use a regular white pasta and know that I'd be getting like a ton of fiber. I would do that for my kids. But anyways, lots of options is the point there. So I went ahead and cooked this according to the package instructions. And the reason I did that is because what I've noticed at my house is that if I make a soup dish, my kids will eat it if I let them have as much pasta as they want. So they basically put like pasta, however much pasta they want, and then we spoon some soup over top of it. So it ends up being like, instead of like a soup, it ends up being like a sauce for the pasta kind of thing. But anyways, it's a good way to introduce them to the flavors. And if they'll eat, if they'll eat a little bit of it, that's fine. They're 2 and 4, by the way. So that is an option. I like also, another reason why I like cooking the pasta separately from the soup is because it's easier for freezing. So if you're going to make like a big pot of this vegetable soup, go ahead and freeze it without the pasta, because pasta doesn't hold up very well in the freezer. Sometimes it kind of crumbles and falls apart, especially when you're reheating it. So that way, when you do take it out of the freezer and you're ready to eat it, you can just cook your pasta separately and add it into the frozen, thawed, cooked soup. And that tends to work a lot better. So some of the reasons why I already went ahead and cooked the pasta, which it doesn't describe it that way in your recipe. If you want to use the instructions of the recipe, that works perfectly fine as well. You just want to make sure, check your pasta box instructions just to make sure that it lines up with, so you don't overcook it. Also, I want to mention some gluten-free pastas are made from beans. So they are like a chickpea pasta. Look at the instructions of those pastas, because a lot of times those will need to be rinsed with cold water to remove some of the starches. So you want to make sure that you do cook those separately, because you don't want to end up with like a gooey textured soup. We have used, there's so many different kinds of pastas out there now. There's black bean pasta, there's red lentil pasta. There's so many different kinds. So just check the instructions on those first. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add, not the pasta yet. I'm going to add our beans. I'm going to go ahead and add the garlic.
Ashley, what's a safe way or safer way to freeze pasta or soup?
To freeze soup or pasta?
Both of them.
I don't freeze pasta ahead of time. I don't really like the texture of frozen pasta. Plus, it cooks pretty quickly on the stovetop. But freezing soup, the way I do it is I just use a smaller quart-sized freezer bag, write the name of it, write the date, and the key with this is don't fill it up all the way. So that holds 4 cups. So that usually that's like enough for 2 people, 2 to 3 people. Don't fill it up all the way. Remove as much air as you possibly can. So kind of try to get the air out and tightly seal it. And then once it's, freeze it flat like this in the freezer. Once it's frozen, you can store them upright to save some room in there. If you have like a container, you can put frozen stuff in. That works really well. You can freeze in like glass containers. I just don't do that at home because I don't have very much room in my freezer. Those take up like a ton of space. But if you have like an extra freezer at home, you can, or a big freezer. That's another really nice way to freeze. That's generally how I do it at home. But it freezes great. Like 3, 4, 5 months, you're good. You have an easy meal.
Freezing them flat is a pro tip that I have no room in my freezer. So
oh my gosh, my freezer is so small. I actually removed the ice maker from my freezer because it is so small, just so I'd have more room. So we have ice trays in my house. Okay, let's look at the recipe. We need to add some spices. So
somebody asked what type of beans.
Oh, what type of beans they are. These today I added cannellini beans, white cannellini beans. It's flexible though. Your recipe says chickpeas. You could use navy beans. You could use, I would use like a milder white, lighter colored bean though. If you want to substitute out these and add the lima beans, I think that would be fine. So on our spices, I just already had this huge thing of Italian seasoning. This is a blend of a bunch of different herbs. So you can follow the recipe and use the basil and the oregano, or you can, if you already have Italian seasoning at home, you can just use this. I'm going to do 2 teaspoons and see how it goes and not add all 4 teaspoons. I might add more. We'll just see. I feel like 4 teaspoons might be too much. So stir this around. This is the same idea. We're kind of opening up the flavor of these spices before I add any liquid. So in the pot so far, we have onions, garlic, carrots, green beans, zucchini, a little bit of salt. We have our beans and our spices. Let me add a little bit of the red chili. This is a red chili pepper flake. Just adds it's not going to be spicy. It's just going to add a little bit of balance of heat. You can, this is optional though, if you're really sensitive to heat. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add our fire roasted canned tomatoes. You don't have to use fire roasted, but that adds another element of flavor. They have basically fire roasted them, I guess, in advance before canning them. So that is an option. You can use regular diced canned tomatoes though. I'm giving it a stir. Then I'm going to add our liquid. Again, I would use the vegetable broth if we had it, but we're going to pretend this is vegetable broth. This is actually chicken broth though. Go with the low sodium. Same thing, about 6 cups. One of these containers is 4 cups, so you don't have to measure. You don't have to get out a separate measuring cup for that. You can just eyeball it. And I think I might actually do, looking at how much liquid is in here, I might just do 5 cups. It's optional. So I'll stop right there. And you're going to bring it up to a simmer. One thing your recipe does, one thing I haven't added on your recipe yet is Parmesan cheese, and that is also an optional ingredient. That adds a depth of flavor. You can also use it as a garnish on the soup, which I'll show you towards the end. Let me just... This was freshly grated Parmesan. Some people will add, if you have a block of Parmesan, so here's a trick. If you buy a real Parmesan from the store, they're usually quite pricey, but they hold well in the freezer. So buy your block of Parmesan, keep it in the freezer, and then pull it out for things like this or any Italian dish. It has such a better flavor, but it doesn't take long to thaw it. You just kind of bring it to room temperature. It doesn't take long at all. And then you can grate it or cut it however you want to. And then at the end, you'll have, on the end of the Parmesan cheese, you'll have a rind. You can't use that rind. It's a soup. Just plot like you would put in a bay leaf, and let that Parmesan rind flavor the liquid of your soup, and then take it out when you're ready to serve it. You wouldn't eat it, but it does add, you do have to consider that it is adding some salt, an unknown amount of sodium to your soup, but if you're okay with that, it will add a really, really nice flavor that people will just be like, what's that really nice? Won't be able to taste cheese, but anyways, it's kind of nice. So that is an option if you have it.
Somebody suggested using a nutritional yeast.
Yeah.
If you're vegan. And
Yeah,
substitute
absolutely.
for
That adds a cheesy flavor. So yes, if you're trying to avoid dairy and you don't want to add the cheese to this nutritional yeast, I think that's a great idea. I love that. And then also in this recipe, we're going to let it kind of simmer a little bit. And also you can add greens if you want to. So I just have spinach here. We're going to really add the veggies, right? So just like a cup. You can add the baby kale though. That comes in a container like this and it cooks really fast in there. Just a nice way to add some greens. Okay, so I'm going to stir that, and then I'm going to work on, turn this one off. I will work on plating these and getting the garnishes ready for our black bean soup while this cooks.
I have a question.
So this probably needs at least 20 minutes to simmer to really soften those carrots and green beans and really kind of bring all those flavors together.
Hold on, Ashley. We had a question from a participant. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, I find with the boxed vegetable broths, they have a different flavor. They change the flavor of the soup. I don't know, they have additives or they have different seasonings. Since you're making all this from scratch, is there a way to make your vegetable broth by just onions, celery, carrots, and add that as a liquid to the soup? Or do you have to, is it so important to go, buy the box of broth soup?
Absolutely. If you're making vegetable soup, or if you're willing to make chicken stock or vegetable stock, absolutely. Gosh, the flavor is going to be so much better. And what we've discussed in this class in the past is taking your vegetable scraps, like these kind of things. So onion peel, you could even use these, as long as these are clean, you could use these carrot tops. Taking your vegetable scraps every time you cook, putting them in a freezer bag, just kind of adding to it every time. And then once you have a quart or so of vegetable scraps, making a stock from that. Absolutely 100% use that instead of the boxed every time if you possibly can. And if you're willing to make the stock yourself, that will have so much flavor. Also, if you have an Instant Pot or a pressure cooker, make your stock in that. It will be so delicious and it will take like no time at all. I think from start to finish for a stock in a pressure cooker, it's like 40 minutes or maybe an hour if you take the time or count in the time it takes to cool it down. And then if you make a big batch of that, you can freeze it and then just pull it out whenever you're ready to add it to your soup. We have done several stock recipes in here. We've done chicken stock in this class before, and then we've done vegetable stock and one also that was called Magic Mineral Broth, where we added like a seaweed to it to add some more minerals to the liquid. So if you're interested in the Magic Mineral Broth, that's in a cookbook called The Cancer Fighting Kitchen. That's a really good recipe. And it doesn't mention making it in a pressure cooker in that, but I would go 100% do that. Instant pot and pressure cooker is basically the same thing. Okay, so I have 2 bowls here. Let's see. Gotta get this on camera. I'm gonna plate our soups. So first, I'm gonna do the black bean. So let's see, the black bean ladle over here. Or here, let's use these. I've got a few garnishes to do for this one. So it's a chunky style soup right now. Let me move this out of the way. Like I said, it's all about the garnishes for me on this one. So the garnishes that I have today are the fresh cilantro, which I've already washed. You don't need to take each individual leaf off. Just make sure it's dry. Give it a mince. Add that on top. And then some avocado. I don't know, it's nice to have that fresh avocado taste. So I just sliced off a section of that and just run my knife through the center. And then use this to kind of spoon out a few pieces right in the center. And then we have some cheese. This is just regular cheddar cheese on a grater. You can buy grated cheese already grated if you want to. Let's do some of that in there. And then we also have a few tortilla chips. This is one I've been liking. It has added, in addition to being like a tortilla style gluten-free corn-based chip, it has added chia seeds, flax seeds, millet, quinoa, and amaranth, which is kind of cool. And it has a really good flavor. So you may want to try these tortilla chips with it. So I'll take some of these. Let's see. Open up our bag. Stick a few of these on the side, like that. Okay, so that's the black bean soup. Really, really good. I know, it smells so good. And now we're gonna do the minestrone. So if you're into vegetables, this one is awesome. Okay. You don't know it at home, but these vegetables need a little bit more time to cook. But you get the idea. So a little bit of soup. This doesn't have the pasta in it yet, so I'm gonna add some of the pasta. And if it was my kids, I'd be adding mostly pasta. But we'll pretend that's a bowl for me. I kind of give it a mix so you can see the veggies in there too. And then top it with a little Parmesan cheese. So that is fall soups. Does anyone have any questions? I think we have some time.
Dang, looks delicious. Thank you. Delicious, super easy recipe. Thank you.
Yeah, and also I want to hear if you have any favorite soup recipes that you're making. I will say a variation that I've done on this soup right here is adding ground beef. I've also added some like tomato juice to give it a little bit more tomato-y taste with the ground beef. And my kids have been liking that. So that's an option.
Ashley, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I noticed you're using the gluten-free pasta for the dishes. I've heard various back and forth about the value of gluten-free, if you're not gluten-free, the value of choosing gluten-free over regular pasta is because it uses maybe a lot more flour or whatever. Do you have a suggestion as to choosing gluten-free over regular pasta if you are not gluten-free?
Oh, that's a good question. So it totally depends upon your taste preference. Look at the fiber content. If you're trying to boost your fiber, then some of the gluten-free pastas that are made from corn may not have as much fiber as like a whole wheat pasta. And so if you don't need to be gluten-free, then there's no need to buy gluten-free products unless you just like the taste or you just want to add some variety. So if it was me, since my family is not eating gluten-free, I would choose like a whole wheat pasta or a regular flour straight up pasta for this. It's a personal preference. Sometimes people like to try the chickpea or the bean-based pastas, and they like the flavor of those. And the nice thing about those is it's basically like adding another bean to your diet. So they're really high in fiber and really high in protein. And also really nice if you do have a vegetarian dish and you're looking for a source of protein in there. So it's only if you like the flavor though. If you're not a big fan, they do tend to be more expensive too. So it's a total personal preference at that point.
Okay, I have a question about the fire roasted tomatoes. Are they spicy, or is that just how they cook the tomatoes?
It's just how they cook them. Think of a tomato that has kind of been grilled, like that grilled kind of flavor.
Okay.
They have just a different flavor than you would have if they were just regular. So it's completely optional. You can try it and taste it. A lot of times that fire roasted tomato is added in like a Southwestern style Spanish dish. Chili, it's pretty popular. But this soup that calls for fire roasted tomatoes will work perfectly well if you already have regular tomatoes on hand.
Okay.
It's not spicy. It's just kind of like a grilled flavor.
Yeah.
So I have a question outside of the soup. And the question is, with fresh vegetables coming to an end right now and the fresh peas and things that are out, do you recommend, because of the nutritional value, to buy a few packages of those, cook them and freeze them? Or is it any more nutritional value than you just buying the frozen butter beans in the store in December?
Okay, good question. Yeah, I think unless you have a garden where you're trying to preserve those fresh ingredients before they go bad, there's no reason why you need to buy fresh and freeze them yourself. Okay. Because the ones in the store that are frozen vegetables, they tend to be less expensive than fresh, and they're super high quality. There's so many different kinds, and they do I feel like, so there's a trick when you're freezing vegetables, and that's called like quick frozen. So that's what they do when they're freezing the vegetables in like a commercial way. And so they're freezing them at the highest peak. I feel really confident with frozen vegetables. I don't think you need to go through the trouble of doing it yourself. Minestrone, if you have frozen vegetables, you can use frozen green beans and frozen beans in there, like the lima beans or frozen corn, frozen peas. This is a good one to make in the winter when there's not a whole lot of fresh produce that looks good.
Yes, thank you. I have a question about freezing beans. I like to cook my beans from fresh beans, but I always have too many.
Okay.
So what's the best way to freeze them?
Okay, so the term that I was trying to think of is called individually quick frozen. And so basically what they do is they take their cooked vegetable and they lay it out on like a sheet pan and make sure that it's not like all piled up. And then you freeze it so that they each individually freeze. So like each green bean freezes separately and they don't all clump together and make like a big mound of green beans. That gives them the best flavor and makes them freeze faster. And then once they're frozen on the sheet pan, then you can put them into your freezer bag or whatever, however you're freezing them and storing them for use later. But that's a really good option if you do have some leftover cooked green beans. I would cook them al dente though, because you're going to need to cook them again when you warm them up from the freezer. So make sure they're not, you don't want them to be like super, super soft at that point if you're going to freeze.
This works for black beans, chickpeas.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. I was referring to green beans, but yes, it works for the cooked dry beans as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
One question on the cannelli beans. Do you drain those beans before you put them in the pot? Do they need to be drained?
Which ones?
The cannelli beans, the ones that are in the
Oh,
can?
yeah. Yes, thank you. Those were canned, and I just ahead of the class, I just rinsed them with water in a strainer, and
Okay, so you do drain them. Okay.
strained off all that liquid,
Okay.
and then they went into the pot like that.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, if that is all the questions, thank you everyone for being here today. We've got some great feedback. Ashley, thank you so much for sharing. You always have great, simple little tips. Great class, really enjoyed it. And thank you all for joining us today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. If you're interested in other live or recorded programs, please visit the online program tab of our website, cscatlanta.org, or follow us on Facebook. We'll be sharing additional information on upcoming programs.